This is the Real Estate Power Play Podcast, getting you the information that you need to be a successful real estate investor. Hosted by Mark Monroe, Ronald Walker, Gabe Rodarte, and me, Marty Grizzanti. Combined, we've done thousands of real estate transactions. So get ready for real stories and true case studies on finding deals, growing portfolios, and making money. Welcome to the show.
Hey guys, what's up? Good morning from the Real Estate Power Play podcast, guys. We come to you live with me, Gabe Rodarte, and the man, Mark Monroe. What's up, Mark? How you been?
Gabe, welcome to the brand new year. I love it.
Yeah.
How are you doing? How are your holidays?
It's been good. It's been adventurous. It's been refreshing. And my whole team and myself, we're all back in the saddle and just making our calls, getting stuff done. It's definitely an adventure. So we're excited, man. We're excited about this recording here that we want to just bring value. We were just talking about it offline. And we're like, let's just do a recording and go over stuff that's going to be really effective for people to know for this coming season. We met through something similar like what we're going to go over, which is basically how to seller finance deals. In a sense, you're creating notes. For those who don't know how to create a note, we'll go over a little bit of that. Different ways to structure it, how to talk to sellers. I mean, this is a full year on training. If you guys want to go deeper into it, we do have other podcasts like that out there. Mark has been doing, gosh, man, you've been doing just the cool stuff that we were talking about the other day, your history in doing mortgages and loans and stuff, man. You've been doing this for a while, and then you just moved it over to the investor world. So it's kind of like this privilege of me interviewing you, in a sense, as one of my good friends, going, okay, let's talk about that. So quick overview. You've been creating notes for how long?
Started in the late 90s, believe it or not. Actually, you want to know, my first note was 19 years old, and I had no clue what I was doing. So if you want to go way back, my first note, and then from there at 19, then I jumped to 25. So I'll tell you the story real quick on my first note. I did that Carlton Sheets course, ordered it from the internet and for commercial.
Got it.
And I went and put these signs up. I wrote on them, we buy houses. I put them up in the telephone poles. This is up in a small town in New England. Got in trouble because I didn't know I couldn't put signs up on telephone poles. So the town called and yelled at me, made me go take them down. But anyways, during that time period, this guy called me up and goes, "Hey, I got this mobile home for sale." And I'm like, and I'm like, I don't want a mobile home. He goes, "It's worth $21,000. Give me $18,000 for it." I'm like, I don't want it. Then he calls me back a week later, goes, "Give me $15,000. It's worth 21." I'm like, I'm really not interested. He calls me back another week later, goes, "Give me 12,000 and it's worth 21." I'm like, "Well, do you own the land?" He goes, "No." I'm like, "Well, I'm not interested." 3 weeks go by. The first is coming around. He calls me up. He goes, "Give me $6,000 for it. It's worth 21." Now I'm thinking to myself, I'm at 19. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm like, you know what? I'm not interested, because I'm still doing that. I'm not interested. I found out that it's in a mobile home park, and he doesn't have the money to pay the lot rent. That's kind of what I found out. And I'm like, I'm not interested, but you know what? I'll give you 3,000 for it. So he goes, no, give me 4. I'm like, I'm not interested. He goes, okay, get me 3,000. So I said, all right, I'm going to send somebody out to inspect the property. Hung up. I had to go to like the Office Depot, get a contract, because the internet wasn't very popular. I don't even know if it was around back then. I had to handwrite it. And then I went and called the newspaper up, and I put a classified ad in a newspaper. Mobile home for sale for $25,000, seller financing, $3,000 down, owner will carry the note. Lady called me up. It was her and her daughter and her husband. They went out, looked at the property. They wanted it. They got me a cashier's check for $3,000, and I turned around and used the $3,000 to buy it. And then I ended up creating a note and carrying it for at 7.5% over 7 years. And I was getting about $270 a month. And that was my car payment and insurance payment. I was 19 years old, and I carried my car payment all through school.
That is so cool, man. And what's interesting is that there's plenty of people that are in their early 20s trying to go, man, I'm not sure I know how to do it. And yet there's so much more information than paying for a Carlton Sheets or anything like that. I mean, our podcast is basically free. Like most podcasts are free of content and stuff for you to get. So you can start now, guys, with this same information that guys like Mark and I had to pay for way back when. We started off, and really, I started looking at real estate in 2008 in the beginning of the crash, but I didn't know how to acquire it. Right. And so, I haven't really been around super, super long, but I've been around since we started doing our stuff around 2012, 13. But I've been flipping for about 15 years now, just in flipping properties in general. But if I would have known anything about what I know now, it's get access to people like Mark or us, and YouTube University. There's free content. So if Mark can do it way back when, I remember Kinko's and all that stuff that we'd have to go through. So guys, let's jump into this. So Mark, okay, you've been doing this for a while. You used to run a mortgage company. You've created hundreds of those type of mortgage notes and refis and all the types of stuff from there. You've done a tremendous amount of things in this industry. And now we're talking about the current moment. We are in January 2023, and we are both seeing multiple categories or classes of investments, from multifamily to invest to storage industry, industrial, mobile home parks for sure. I just got another call today on a park in Louisiana. And then we have plenty of single family, and this whole gamut of properties. And multiple people right now are saying, hey, I could do a seller carry, or I could do a debt takeover, or seller finance. And now you have to know more than just wholesaling and flipping, right? Because the market at this current moment in 2023 isn't saying that you're going to be able to flip and make the major amount of money that you did in the last 2 or 3 years. You'll still do well, by the way, if you buy low and sell high. That's pretty much how it goes. But we have this cool category called seller financing, right? So let's go into that. Seller financing. Mark, what is it, and how are you creating a note?
So to me, seller financing there's many different strategies within seller financing. You have the straight seller financing, where there's no mortgage on the property and the seller becomes the bank. And that's how during the last, the boom that's been going on for the last 10 years, I've always been doing the seller financing where straight through, while everybody else is doing wholesaling. I was been creating notes, creating positive cash flow coming in. And then, now and then I was doing more seller financing than I was doing wholesaling deals during the past, where everybody else was focusing on it. But I go into it showing the benefit of the seller, you being the bank, and they don't have to be distressed. These sellers, when you do seller financing, you can give them premium value for the price. Like, I'm willing to pay what the value is today, even though the market's going to pull back in the next 12 months to 24 months. I'm willing to give them today's price, as long as they're willing to give me the term that I'm looking for, like 10 years. So the market can kind of go through that. What I look for is the cash flow. And then you create the note. And then, as you know, and you've done a lot of this, Gabe, selling your notes into the secondary market. And I'm going to ask you that question in a moment. But when I create a note, is the beauty of seller financing when I'm selling it is I can get a premium for that property. If that property is worth today $250,000, I can sell it to my end buyer for a little bit more, and then I'm also making interest. So what I like to do is I like to buy seller financing and turn around and sell it seller financing, create a premium in between, and create an arbitrage, and just stay right in the middle. And I do that through straight seller financing, subject to. Subject to is when you're Gabe, why don't you explain what a subject to is? Can't hear you. You're on mute, Gabe.
Yeah, subject to is subject to the existing loan. So for instance, I have a property that the loan that's on it right now is let's just say 130 grand. And we're going to do 130 grand is the note. And he had a good friend come in and say, hey, I'll pay, kind of threw our numbers off, but he's like, hey, I'll pay you $10,000 and just take over the note. Well, this note that this kid has is right at 4.25. I'm going to do the math in my calculator while we're doing it. 4.25, and he owes 130. It's like 128. Let's say 130. All right. So he's paying $640 a month. All right. In just the principal and interest of this property. We're not talking about taxes and insurance, but that's how much He's had this note for, it's only been 2 years of servicing that he has it for. This is his house. It needs a new AC. It needs a paint, flooring, carpet, stuff like that. I guess he bought it as one of those type of fixer-up type homes, lived there, and now he's moving. He's got to go for a job change. Young kid, right? And he's like, look, man, work a deal. How do you want to make this happen? And so someone else already offered him some money for this property. And I was like, well, I could do one up. You know, I could pay you a little bit more. So I'm going to pay him probably close to $12,000 for this property, right? The property's worth probably 185, 190. And what's going to happen is I'm going to take over his existing note. Okay. Pay him cash to help him move on from the property. Now the property still needs rehab. It still needs work to be done. But instead of me doing the work, what I'm going to do is called a wrap. And then that wrap, we're going to go and find an end buyer who's looking for that type of property, right? We'll go through an RMLO, right? Which is like basically a loan servicing company who's going to come in and they're going to vet the new buyer for me. So I don't have to go through all of that stuff. RMLO goes through, they vet that new buyer for me, and then we're able to sell that property. And instead of selling it at the market rate of 190 ARV, I might even be able to sell it for 200, pay a little bit more is what they're willing to do, an end buyer, because they need to get into a home. And typically they don't have perfect credit, or maybe they're self-employed, right? And then that is going to be at mainly a higher rate because our neck's on the line too. So you're not doing like a 4%, you're doing a higher rate of return. And then I make that arbitrage money. And so that's what we call a wrap note. So I am paying the original note of $650 a month, $640. And the wrap note, let's say they give me, instead of 10% down or $10,000 down, they give me $20,000 down. So I take that $20,000, I end up paying him his money, just like Mark said, when he was 19 years old. And then I get whatever's left over, right? I pocket that. That's my commission and my team and everything else. And that keeps the machine going. And then there's a continual note, which is an arbitrage number. And let's say that's an extra $600, right? And so that you do that enough and you do that 10 times and that's $6,000 cash flow. And these notes are 30-year notes. So that's typically what I see, Mark. And what I see is definitely going to be needed. And correct me if I'm wrong. If we see higher notes, doesn't it make sense that there's going to be a lot more of these opportunities where we see, I don't know, 5.5%, 5% loans, or even higher in some instances? And it'd be great just to go in and say, you know what, I'll just take over your 3.5% mortgage and pay you some money. Now, is that what you're talking about? What's going to happen in this next season and what we're both kind of seeing?
100%. I definitely see it. Now, did you explain about a subject to, like, how does the transfer of the property work in a subject to?
So the deed transfers, right? But the loan stays in the name, right? And we see this multiple times over and over, over and over again. How that basically works is that the existing loan on this guy is, what we say, 130 grand. The loan just stays in place, right? And that's connected to the property. All right. So that's a deed of trust, right? But the actual name on the title gets transferred over to your name, right? And then if you create a wrap, you would get it transferred over to the end buyer's name. And there's plenty of people and they do trust. I know Mark likes to do trust. This is the rudimentary, very easy to understand way to put it, but there's a lot of other cool things that you could do once you get into the whole business.
Now, with a subject to, there is risk involved in a subject to. And why don't you kind of explain that? And then once you're done, we're talking subject to, then we're going to go into a couple other strategies. But what's the risk with a subject to, Gabe?
The main risk of a sub to on the buyer side is that the buyer stops paying, right? If the buyer stops paying, then the loan goes back to, the property goes back to you. And that's the same thing with seller finance too, right? If you sell a property or if you're the bank and someone doesn't pay you, then it just is it's an easy foreclosure. And typically in most states, you got to go through that process. Obviously, you don't want to kick people out of their homes at any season. So you probably will try to work with them in whatever way. And if things don't work out after a couple months, go, look, it'd be better if we just moved on from this scenario. Most people understand that. I mean, they know if they're behind on payments, right? They know if they're not making things work. So that's really the highest risk. And then the property comes back to you and you have to go and do it all over again.
Now, I'm going to throw in there from the real estate banking world another risk factor in subject to. It's what's called the due on sales clause.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
And the due on sales clause is where back in the mid 80s, before you used to be able to assume mortgages a lot before the 1980s. So what they did is they put in every mortgage note that's been sold today is if you transfer the property out of the seller's name into another party's name from what the original loan was originated in and they qualified on, the lender can do what's called a trigger the due on sales clause. It's not illegal. They can just trigger it. And the lenders do know that this is happening. They just want, banks are in business to make money. They just want their payment. But what could happen is when you transfer, like if I'm taking my property and I'm transferring it to Gabe, my lender technically could call the loan due because I'm no longer the ownership Gabe is, even though I qualified for the loan in my name. So that's one of the risk factors. And then what you're mentioning there. Now, if besides a subject to, if you get a seller is like, there's no way I'm going to transfer my property out of my name and keeping a mortgage in my name. Then what do you do? Then what I do is I do what's called an agreement for deed or a contract for deed. So the difference is it's the same thing that Gabe was saying, kind of wrapping and everything. You can do all that, but the title stays in the seller's name in the deed, everything that stay in ownership, but it's all open in escrow and you have an agreement. And then when you're done with the agreement, then all the same terms take place and the transfers over into stuff that nature. So that's kind of one of the strategies I tend to do. It's the exact same thing what Gabe was saying. You take the property, you lock it up with your seller and you turn around and sell it with the buyer and you create an arbitrage. So that's just another strategy. And have you done one of those? Have you kind of understand that too as well, Gabe? Correct?
Right. But let's go into that because I think that when people hear contract for deed, they get lost in the terminology, right? And that's what I've noticed the most, like when in our DMs and stuff like that, like, hey, help me understand this, or what, how do I go about using this? So let's go into a little detail on contract for deed. What do you see? What's the best scenario? Let's use some real numbers here.
Use the same scenario that you're using.
Okay. So let's say we have a $130,000 note that's there. Okay. And you're going to create a contract for deed.
Correct.
Okay. All right. And then guide us through on what's next from there? What are you telling the seller? Because they're like, I don't want this thing in my name. I'm not sure you're going to pay me, blah, blah, blah.
So, well, the seller, it stays in their name. The difference is in agreement for deed, a contract for deed is the person that the buyer is responsible for all maintenance repairs. They're responsible for the property. They're responsible for taxes. They're responsible for insurance. The difference is the mortgage is staying in the seller's name, and it can be done based if your contract, if there's escrows included within the mortgage. If not, then they could pay it separately. But either way, within the contract agreement, the buyer is responsible for all those fees, HOA, whatever it may be. It's the exact same thing as a note. The difference is you're really not creating a note in this case, but you're structuring it like a note, but it's a contract for deed. So you have to meet the same terms as you're creating in a note, but it's going into the contract. In the contract, you have to meet those terms to be able to get the property at the end. If it's a 5-year, whatever, if you're doing
so how much money gets paid to the seller in this type of thing? Does the seller's like, hey man, I need $10,000. Are you just going, okay, cool, I'll pay you 10?
Same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the same thing as if you're doing a seller financing deal or sub 2, whatever. You're giving them the $10,000. The exact same thing. It's coming down off that price. It's the exact same concept. The only difference is you're just using a different contract in the way it's structured when you're closing. And when you close, a lot of times you can actually, depending on the state, depending on your closing agent, you can actually have the seller sign all the closing documents, the warranty deed and everything. It transfers, but it doesn't get recorded until you meet the terms of the contract within a deed in, say, 5 years. So all that sits in escrow during that time period. Now, there's ways of also doing it where they don't sign it and then they sign it in the end, but I like to have everything signed today so I don't have to check, like, hey, I don't know where the seller's going to be in 5 years.
And so, guys, we're talking about this stuff because we think we're trying to hit this as hard as possible, get this information out to you because we think it's going to be really needed in the season just to be creative. I mean, this is just one example that we're talking about, and this is live now time. This deal came across our desk yesterday, right? So this is really happening. So Mark, what else? Why is this? Why do you think in the current climate that we're in and just market conditions, probably all of 2023, is this so valuable to add to somebody's arsenal of just tools?
Why
not just
the sellers
wholesale?
are
Why
going to have
not
a
just
hard.
go, you know what, I'm just going to sell it, or why not just go that? I mean, if this thing's worth 180, right? You got to think about, okay, well, you picked it up for 130. He wants 10. So then now you're at 140. You're going to put about 20K of rehab into it, maybe 15, but 20K to get it rent ready. So now you're at where we at 160, right? Then you have money and everything else. What does that even come out to be? Where you're at 80% or more than that?
Yeah, most likely.
Right.
Yep.
So now you're at more than that. And so most people will look at this and go, I don't know how I'm going to make these numbers work.
100%. You nailed it. And the market, like, especially if people just purchased their home, like if you like FHA or VA, if they purchased a home a year ago to 2 years ago, as you know, when you do FHA and VA loans, there's no equity in the property. So these sellers, if they have to sell today, they have to come to the money. They have to come to the table with money. And a lot of times they don't have that money. So that's where these strategies come in. And there's one more strategy I want to just touch base on real quick. Besides the seller financing sub to the agreement for deed, is also where I learned my original strategy in the late 90s is lease options or sandwich lease options. I'm actually just looked at my phone right now as we're talking. I actually have a loan closing tomorrow that I did a sandwich lease option 2 years ago. And I'll just run through those numbers real quick. So I went under contract 2.5 years ago. It was in Orlando with my seller. I purchased, these are exact numbers. So I purchased it from my seller for 170. Okay.
Got it.
And my agreement with them is, so a lease sandwich lease option is, it's a regular rental agreement that you do your typical way. Everybody's probably done a lease agreement or a rent agreement, but in there, it allows me to sublet it and it allows me to purchase it at a set price that I'm putting into the agreement for today. So I did this 2.5 years ago, 170. My rent is, the market rent in that area is $1,400, but I got the seller down to $1,200 because I tell the seller I'm going to take care of the maintenance repairs up to like $3,500. Anything more than that, the homeowner's insurance would kick in. I'm sorry. Yeah, the homeowner's insurance may be something to that nature. All right. And then I only put first month and last month down. So I put $2,400 down. Okay. And I put that what's called an option fee. So it locks it up. So when I purchase it, it comes out that price. Plus, I got $150 monthly rent credit, and that was over 30 months. So
Nice.
now that we're doing it, 150 times 30, that's another $4,500 that I'm getting in credit. Plus the $2,400 I put down. That's
And why do people want to put
$6,900.
credits on there? Why is the credit side important? The rent
I
credit.
just like it. You're getting more. It's coming off the sales price. I always say, hey, it's incentive to pay it on time. That's how a lot
Right.
of that's how they used to be structured years ago.
Right.
They're really not structured that much anymore at today's factor, but I like doing it. So I'm getting $7,000 off that purchase price of the 170. Okay. So, and these are real numbers I'm closing on right now. So then my real purchase price on that is going to be 163. Okay.
Got it.
Now I sold it to my end buyer for 209.
Got it.
Okay. And he was paying me $1,550 a month.
Nice.
So I was making $300 a month cash flow on that deal at 30 months. So that was $9,000. So I made that. Okay. So you take those numbers, right? And let me go through this scenario real quick. I sold it to my end buyer, and this is how you can do this with no money down. This is how you can do these type of transactions with no money to very little money. I locked it up for like $100 down, went out, found my buyer, and I told my buyer, my end buyer, sold it for 209. And by the way, this property today is worth 265,000.
Dang, nice.
And even though my buyer is buying it for 209, so my buyer's making out because last several years the market's gone crazy. So technically, he didn't exercise his option. He was supposed to notify me within 60 days by the end of the contract that he's going to exercise his option. Technically, I could have said, "Hey, you voided your contract. Sorry, I'm not selling it to you." and I could have turned around and sold it for 269, but I'm not going to do that. These guys are great people, good tenants, no issue. So I'm selling it and I'm honoring the 209. But anyways, I sold it for 209. They put first month, last month in security down and 5% of the 209. So I got close to $12,000 down. And out of that, I had to give my buyer $2,400. I kept the rest of that cash. And then I also made an extra I made an extra $300 a month. So if you just do the numbers, 170 into 209, right? That's 39,000 plus 7,000 credit, right? And plus another, 150 times 30. That was another $4,500. So 4,500 plus 7,000 plus what's the difference? 109. I'm sorry, 170 into 209. So it's 39,000 there plus 4,500 credit and $7,000. So on that total deal, I'm gonna make about $50,500 and not even owning this property. I controlled it through contracts because the lease was in the seller's name. So the only downside on that is I didn't get the depreciation. But anyways, that's what you call a sandwich lease option.
There you go, guys. And so this is a cool thing for you to learn in this next season. If you're getting involved or you want to connect with more people as far as like your sellers and you don't have other options and you're knowing that wholesaling the deal probably isn't going to work, or maybe, it's kind of a shallow deal, or you don't have the cash to take it down, you don't want to flip it, and you're like, I know there's money in this, I don't know how to do it. This is one of the coolest ways to do it. So guys, thank you so much for just listening to us today. We just want to help you out. This is going to go out hopefully pretty quick, so that way we can get this into your hands and you can start using some of these tools and find out more information. Look us up on the Real Estate Power Play podcast on YouTube. You can connect with Mark or Gabe. We're happy to help you out. Thanks, guys, and we'll see you later. Peace.
Take care.
This has been another episode of Real Estate Power Play, guiding real estate entrepreneurs to a brighter future. If you liked what you heard, consider subscribing wherever you listen to your podcast, or follow us on YouTube at Real Estate Power Play.